She lived alone in the middle of nowhere until 11 men asked to spend the night. By dawn, only one of them would still be breathing. Elena Rodriguez stood at her kitchen window, watching the dust cloud grow larger against the evening sky. 11 riders approached her cabin, their silhouettes dark against the fading light. She lived 40 miles from the nearest town of Millbrook, where no roads led and few travelers ever passed. Men didn't just stumble upon her place by accident. Her fingers found the rifle leaning against the wall. The weapon felt familiar, comforting. She'd learned to use it the hard way after her husband died and left her alone with nothing but this isolated piece of land and the knowledge that survival meant being ready for anything. The riders came closer. She could see their faces now, weathered hard men with the look of trouble in their eyes. The leader, a tall man with a scar running down his left cheek, dismounted first. His name was Marcus Blake, though Elena didn't know it yet. What she did know was the way he looked at her cabin like a man appraising something he intended to take. "Evening, ma'am," Marcus called out, removing his hat with exaggerated politeness. "We've been riding hard for 2 days, wondering if you might have room for some weary travelers to rest for the night." Elena remained by the window, her hand still on the rifle. Something about their request felt wrong. Honest men would have asked for water or directions, maybe offered to pay for a meal, but asking to spend the night at a lone woman's cabin, that was different. "I don't take in strangers," she replied through the glass, keeping her voice steady. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Now that's not very neighborly. We're just looking for a warm place to sleep. Won't be any trouble." The other 10 men spread out behind him, not in the casual way of tired travelers, but with the calculated movement of men positioning themselves for something. Elena had seen wolves hunt before. This felt exactly the same. "My answer stands," she said. Marcus's fake smile faded. "Ma'am, I wasn't really asking." Elena stepped back from the window, her mind racing. 11 armed men against 1 woman. The nearest help was a day's ride away. No one would hear her scream. No one would find her body for weeks, maybe months. These men knew it, and they were counting on her knowing it too. But they'd made one critical mistake. They thought being alone made her helpless. What they didn't know was that Elena Rodriguez had spent 3 years learning every inch of this land, every hiding spot, every advantage it could give her. And she'd promised herself standing over her husband's grave that she would never be anyone's victim. The question was, would 11 men be enough to break that promise? Elena's hands moved quickly but quietly, checking the rifle's chamber, fully loaded. 6 rounds, 11 men. The math wasn't in her favor, but mathematics had never been her strongest weapon anyway. Her mind was. "We're coming in now, ma'am," Marcus announced, his voice dropping the pretense of politeness. "You can make this easy, or you can make it hard. Either way, we're sleeping in your cabin tonight." Through the window, Elena watched him gesture to his men. 5 moved toward the front door, while 4 circled toward the back. The last 2 remained with the horses, but their hands rested on their weapons. These weren't desperate travelers. They were predators who'd done this before. Elena thought of her husband, Miguel, how he'd built this cabin with windows positioned specifically for defense, how he'd shown her the loose floorboard that hid their emergency supplies. He'd known that someday she might face something like this alone. "Time to put that knowledge to use," she whispered to herself. The front door handle rattled. Elena had barred it from the inside, but wooden bars only delayed the inevitable. She heard Marcus's frustrated curse, followed by the sound of shoulders slamming against the door. Moving silently through the darkness of her own home, Elena reached the loose floorboard. Inside the hidden compartment lay 3 sticks of dynamite Miguel had kept for clearing tree stumps, a box of matches, and a bottle of kerosene. Her husband had been a practical man who believed in being prepared for any situation. The back door splintered. Heavy boots stomped across her kitchen floor. "Find her," Marcus's voice carried through the cabin. "Check every room." Elena slipped the dynamite into her dress pocket and grabbed the kerosene. In the darkness, she knew every creak of every floorboard while they stumbled around like blind men. That gave her maybe 2 minutes before they found her hiding spot behind the stone fireplace. She thought about Miguel again, how he'd made her practice this exact scenario. "If bad men ever come," he'd said, "don't try to fight fair. Fair fights are for people who have choices. You'll only have chances." A lamp flared to life in the kitchen. One of the men had found her oil supply. "She's here somewhere," she heard Marcus say. "Search faster." Elena's fingers found the matches. Her first chance was about to present itself. These men expected a frightened woman cowering in a corner. They expected begging, crying, maybe an attempt to negotiate. They didn't expect someone who'd spent 3 years turning her home into a fortress. But before she could strike the first match, she heard something that made her blood freeze. One of the men was laughing, and he was saying words that told her everything she needed to know about why they'd really come. "Boss, look what I found in her bedroom. Wedding dress still hanging up. This one's been missing a man for a while." The laughter that followed told Elena these 11 men hadn't just stumbled upon her cabin. They'd been hunting for exactly what they'd found. A woman alone, with no one to protect her, and no one to mourn her. Now the question wasn't whether she could survive the night. The question was whether she could make them regret ever finding her. Elena struck the match. The tiny flame illuminated her face for just a moment before she touched it to the kerosene-soaked rag she'd wrapped around the first stick of dynamite. The fuse hissed to life, casting dancing shadows on the stone fireplace that concealed her. She had 30 seconds before the explosion. "Check behind the fireplace," Marcus ordered. Heavy footsteps approached her hiding spot. 2 seconds. Elena rolled the lit dynamite across the floor toward the kitchen where the men had gathered around their lamp. In the darkness, it looked like nothing more than a piece of fallen firewood. She pressed herself against the stone wall and covered her ears. 20 seconds. "What was that noise?" one of the men asked. 15 seconds. Elena closed her eyes and thought of Miguel. He'd taught her that survival wasn't about being stronger or faster than your enemies. It was about being smarter, more prepared, and more willing to do what needed to be done. 10 seconds, boss. There's something rolling around on the floor. 5 seconds. That's not... The explosion shattered the night. The entire cabin shook as if God himself had struck it with his fist. Windows blew out in a shower of glass and splinters. The kitchen table, where 5 of the men had been standing, simply ceased to exist. Elena's ears rang so loudly she couldn't hear her own breathing, but she could see the orange glow of fire spreading across what remained of her kitchen floor. 4 men lay motionless in the wreckage. A 5th crawled toward the door, his left arm hanging at an impossible angle. Marcus staggered to his feet near the ruined doorway, blood streaming from a gash across his forehead. He was shouting something, but Elena couldn't make out the words through the ringing in her ears. She grabbed her rifle and the remaining 2 sticks of dynamite. 6 men down, 5 still standing. Better odds. But the game was far from over. The men outside were shouting now, their voices carrying across the burning ruins of her front room. She heard horses neighing in terror, and the sound of boots running toward the cabin. Elena slipped out through a gap in the stone fireplace that led to a crawl space Miguel had built for exactly this purpose. The narrow tunnel ran underneath the cabin floor and emerged behind the woodshed, 30 yards from the main building. As she crawled through the darkness, she could hear Marcus's voice clearer now as her hearing returned. "Burn it down," he was screaming. "Burn the whole thing down. She's in there somewhere." Elena emerged behind the woodshed just as the remaining men began throwing lit branches onto her cabin roof. The home she'd shared with Miguel, where she'd planned to live out her days, was being consumed by flames. But they'd made another mistake. They thought the fire would flush her out or kill her. They didn't know she was already behind them with 2 sticks of dynamite and a very personal reason to use them. Elena crouched behind the woodshed, watching her life burn. Every piece of furniture Miguel had made by hand. Every photograph of their brief but happy marriage. Every memory of the only place she'd ever felt safe. All of it turning to ash and smoke. The 5 surviving men stood silhouetted against the flames, their backs to her. Marcus was gesturing wildly, still convinced she was trapped inside the inferno. "She's gotta come out eventually," one of his men said. "Ain't nowhere else for her to go." "Maybe she's already dead," suggested another, nursing a burned hand. "That explosion could have killed her." Marcus shook his head, wiping blood from the cut on his forehead. "Women like her don't die easy. She's got fight in her. We stay here until we're sure." Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear. She was past fear now. Something harder, more dangerous. These men had taken everything from her. Her home, her security, her sanctuary. They'd turned her refuge into a tomb and were now celebrating their handiwork. Miguel had always said that revenge was a luxury she couldn't afford, but Miguel wasn't here anymore, and luxury had a different meaning when you had nothing left to lose. She lit the second stick of dynamite, but this time she had a different plan. Instead of rolling it toward the men, she crept closer, using the noise of the crackling fire to mask her footsteps. The horses were tied to a post near where the men stood, spooked animals in the firelight, pulling at their ropes and whinnying in terror. Perfect. Elena lobbed the dynamite toward the horses. The animals sensed danger before the men did, rearing and screaming as the lit fuse landed among their hooves. In the chaos that followed, Elena aimed her rifle at the largest target, Marcus's broad back. But before she could pull the trigger, one of the horses broke free and galloped directly into her line of fire, followed by another. The entire scene dissolved into mayhem as the remaining horses panicked and scattered in all directions. The dynamite exploded among the fleeing animals. The blast killed 2 horses instantly and sent the men diving for cover. Elena lost sight of Marcus in the smoke and confusion. When the dust settled, only 3 men remained standing. Marcus was nowhere to be seen. "Where is she?" one of the survivors shouted. "Where's that witch hiding?" Elena smiled grimly in the darkness. They'd just called her the perfect name. She was a witch now. A woman who'd lost everything and discovered that having nothing left to lose was the most dangerous weapon of all. She had 1 stick of dynamite remaining and 3 men between her and whatever remained of her future. But before she could move, she heard something that made her pause. Marcus's voice coming from somewhere behind her. "Looking for me?" Elena spun around to find the scarred man standing 10 feet away, his gun pointed directly at her heart. In the flickering firelight, his smile looked like something carved by the devil himself. "Drop the rifle," he said quietly, "and hand over that last stick of dynamite, nice and slow. If you were Elena, what would you do? Drop your weapons and hope for mercy from a man who'd already proven he had none, or make one final, desperate play that could end everything? Because what Elena decided next would determine whether she lived to see another sunrise." Elena looked into Marcus's eyes and saw her own death reflected there. But she also saw something else. A man who'd grown overconfident, who thought he'd already won. That overconfidence was about to cost him everything. "You know what I like about women like you," Marcus said, keeping his gun trained on her. "You fight real pretty right up until the end. Makes it more interesting." Elena slowly raised her hands, still holding the rifle in her right and the dynamite in her left. "You want them? Come and take them. Smart girl, drop them both now." Instead, Elena smiled. "Tell me something, Marcus. Did you count the seconds on that last explosion?" Marcus's confident expression flickered. "What? 30 seconds from light to blast. That's how long the fuse burns." Elena's smile widened. "I lit this one 40 seconds ago." The lie came so smoothly that even Elena almost believed it herself. But Marcus's eyes widened in terror as he looked at the unlit dynamite in her hand. His mind too panicked to realize she was bluffing. In that moment of hesitation, Elena dove sideways and rolled behind a water barrel. Marcus's shot splintered the wood inches from her head, but she was already moving, using his own fear against him. She came up firing. Her first shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Her second shot went wide as he staggered backward toward the burning cabin. "You crazy witch!" Marcus screamed, clutching his wounded shoulder. "I'll kill you for this." But Elena was already striking a match. This time, the dynamite fuse really did hiss to life. 29 seconds, Marcus," she called out. 28, 27 point. Marcus turned and ran toward where his 3 remaining men were crouched behind an overturned wagon. Elena counted down loudly, her voice carrying across the firelit chaos. 15, 14 point. She saw the men break cover and sprint toward the tree line, abandoning any thought of completing their mission. Marcus limped after them, looking back over his shoulder with pure hatred in his eyes. 5, 4 dots, 3 dots. At the last second, Elena hurled the dynamite as hard as she could toward the fleeing men. It landed 20 feet behind them and exploded in a shower of dirt and rock, close enough to send them sprawling, but far enough away to let them live. The message was clear. She could have killed them all, but she was choosing to let them go this time.
As the 4 survivors disappeared into the darkness, Elena stood alone among the ruins of her life. Her cabin was a charred skeleton against the night sky. Her horses were scattered or dead. Everything she'd built with Miguel was gone. But she was alive. And more importantly, she'd discovered something about herself that she'd never known before. She wasn't just a woman who could survive alone in the wilderness. She was a woman who could win wars when they were brought to her doorstep. The question now was what she would do with that knowledge. Dawn broke over the smoldering remains of Elena's cabin, painting the destruction in shades of gold and ash. She sat on a fallen log, her rifle across her knees, watching the last wisps of smoke rise from what had been her kitchen. 7 bodies lay scattered around the ruins. The men who died in the first explosion would never threaten another woman, never destroy another home. Elena felt no satisfaction in their deaths, but no regret either. They'd made their choice when they decided to hunt her. She thought about Marcus and his 3 surviving men, somewhere out there in the wilderness, nursing their wounds and their wounded pride. They'd escaped with their lives, but they'd learned something important. Not every woman alone was helpless, and not every isolated cabin was an easy target. Elena stood and walked through the ruins of her home. In the ashes of her bedroom, she found the iron frame of her bed, twisted but intact. Beneath it, protected by fallen timbers, lay the small wooden box where she'd kept her most precious possessions. Inside the box was Miguel's wedding ring, the deed to their land, and $43 in carefully saved bills. Everything else was gone, but these 3 things represented everything she needed: love remembered, legal ownership, and enough money for a fresh start. As she tucked the box under her arm, Elena heard hoofbeats approaching. Her hand instinctively went to her rifle until she recognized the rider. Old Samuel Mitchell from the nearest town, leading a pack horse behind him. Samuel dismounted slowly, his weathered face grim as he took in the devastation. "Saw the smoke from 15 miles away," he said quietly. "Figured I better come see what happened." 11 men came calling, Elena replied simply. 7 of them decided to stay permanently. Samuel nodded, understanding everything from those few words. In the frontier, explanations weren't always necessary. Results spoke louder than reasons. "You planning to rebuild?" he asked. Elena looked around at the ruins one more time. This place held too many memories of happiness, and now it held memories of violence, too. She'd defended it successfully, but defending something and wanting to keep it weren't the same thing. "No," she said finally. "This chapter of my life is finished." Samuel reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a letter. "Might be this is perfect timing, then. Got a message for you from my cousin in Colorado. Town called Pine Valley is looking for a school teacher. Good people, decent pay, safe place for a woman to start over." Elena took the letter, scanning its contents. A teaching position, a small house provided, and a community that valued education over gossip. It sounded like everything Miguel would have wanted for her if something ever happened to him. "How long would it take to get there?" she asked. 2 weeks on horseback. I could escort you most of the way if you're interested." Elena walked to the ruins of her garden where Miguel had planted apple trees 3 springs ago. The trees were damaged but not dead. In a few years, someone else might enjoy their fruit. The land would recover, even if she wouldn't be here to see it. She thought about the woman she'd been 24 hours ago, cautious, isolated, defined by loss and fear. That woman had died in the explosions along with Marcus's men. The woman standing here now was someone new, someone who discovered that she could face the worst humanity had to offer and emerge victorious. "I'll take the job," Elena said, turning back to Samuel. "When can we leave?" 3 months later, Elena stood in front of her new schoolhouse in Pine Valley, watching her students file out after another successful day of lessons. The children called her Miss Elena, and none of them knew about the night that had changed everything. To them, she was simply their teacher, patient, kind, and surprisingly good at settling disputes between the more troublesome boys. The town had welcomed her with open arms. The general store owner's wife had insisted on helping her choose curtains for the little house behind the school. The blacksmith had repaired her rifle free of charge, asking no questions about the scratches and scorch marks on the barrel. The sheriff, a decent man named Sheriff Davis, had introduced her to everyone as a lady who knows how to take care of herself. Life in Pine Valley was peaceful, predictable, safe. Everything Elena had thought she wanted after that terrible night. But sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, she found herself listening for hoofbeats that never came. This particular afternoon, as she was erasing the day's arithmetic lesson from the blackboard, she heard familiar voices outside her window. 4 men on horseback were asking the postmaster for directions. One voice made her blood run cold. Marcus. Elena set down the chalk and moved carefully to the window. There they were, the 4 survivors from that night, looking healthier and better armed than before. Marcus's left arm hung stiffly at his side where her bullet had found its mark, but his eyes held the same predatory gleam she remembered. "We're looking for a woman," Marcus was saying to the postmaster. "About 35, dark hair, might be calling herself a widow, goes by Elena." The postmaster, bless his suspicious heart, shook his head. "Don't know nobody by that name, stranger. Might try the next town over." Elena smiled grimly. Small towns protected their own, and she'd become one of theirs. But she also knew that Marcus wouldn't give up easily. Men like him didn't forget humiliation, and she'd given him a very public dose of it. She walked calmly to her desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay the Derringer Samuel Mitchell had given her as a going-away present. "For emergencies," he'd said, "because sometimes a rifle ain't practical." Elena slipped the small gun into her dress pocket and walked outside. The 4 men were mounting their horses, preparing to continue their search. Marcus's eyes swept across the schoolhouse and stopped when they found her standing on the front steps. For a moment, neither of them moved. Recognition flickered across his scarred features, followed by something that might have been fear. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Elena called out pleasantly. "Beautiful day for traveling, isn't it?" Marcus's hand moved toward his gun, then stopped. Around them, the normal life of Pine Valley continued. Children playing, women hanging laundry, men conducting business. Too many witnesses, too many people who would remember. "Ma'am," Marcus said finally, touching his hat brim with mock politeness. But his eyes promised that this wasn't over. "Safe travels," Elena replied, her hand resting casually in her pocket. The 4 men rode out of town slowly, but Elena knew they'd be back. Some men never learned when to quit, but that was fine with her. She'd learned something important that night 3 months ago, something that had nothing to do with dynamite or rifles. She'd learned that she was exactly who she needed to be.